Hello and welcome to our London History Podcast, where we share our love of London, its people, places and history. This podcast is designed for you to learn things about London that most Londoners don't even know, all in 20 minutes. I am your host, Hazel Baker, a qualified London tour guide and CEO of LondonGuidedWalks.co.uk. If you like what you hear, then please rate and review on Apple and Google Podcasts. Thank you to all of you who have left a review. It's really very much appreciated. I read every single one. You've wanted videos. You want podcasts to be longer and also for better quality transcripts. And in light of that, we have delivered just that. For more information on how to support the podcast, also access to recommended reading and related blog posts, then please go to londonguidedwalks.co.uk/podcast. Get that cup of tea, put your feet up, and enjoy. Joining me in the studio is Anthony Chalmers, host of Out for a Walk podcast. He's an enthusiastic London walker and explorer who's keen on sharing his love of urban wildlife and to inspire people to explore their local environment. And with lockdown lifting, this is the perfect time to do it. So hello, Anthony.
Hi, thanks a lot for having me.
Why don't you tell us all about whereabouts you have been walking over lockdown?
So I live in Lewisham in southeast London. So everywhere from here down to Kent and Surrey and heading up into West London and Central a little bit is sort of my hood.
And is there a London walk you absolutely love?
Yeah, not too far from me. A walk that I absolutely love is my local river. So I have the River Pool and the River Ravensbourne that starts down at Keston in sort of Bromley, Kent, right on the edge of London. And I follow the river up through Forest Hill to Ladywell, Catford, and all the way up through Deptford until it comes out into the Thames in Greenwich. I've done that walk a couple of times from here up there, and I also did from back to the source in Keston Common a couple of weeks ago through Bromley Common and all the way down. It comes out of a lovely bubbling spring, just in the ground by some lakes, clear spring water. It was a very nice one. I need to explore that area more because it was a long walk, like maybe 18 to 20 miles round. When I got there, it doesn't leave too much time to potter around in the common and see what's there. It's like you got to get there, have a drink of water. That was very nice. Turn around and get yourself home.
And we know that walking's good for the soul as well as being good exercise. And how was it for you, this story of progressing your walking?
I tried to walk most of the streets in the local area, like when in whatever it was in March or April, when we weren't really allowed to go anywhere and we were just figuring out what was what. And then from there, I spent a lot of time in South Norwood Country Park, which is old Victorian sewage works that's been reclaimed as a parkland, as a nature reserve since the 1970s. And those sort of ex-industrial sort of human usage spaces are, I think, some of the best and most interesting that you have in London, give you the sort of urban rural combination that I feel is quite unique and quite interesting.
When I go to Woolwich Way and I'm walking along the River Thames there, and there's so much industrial wasteland and a lot of it's been rebuilt on now. Now they're actually putting plaques up about the heritage of the area that might not have been obvious before. So there is a benefit for areas being regenerated. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's curious. Like I've been quite extensively around Crayford Marshes, which is just a little bit further along the Thames from there. That is an area that I can spend a lot of time in. It feels though, even though you're on the Thames, you're not that far away from London, I guess maybe 12 miles from central London or something, but it definitely feels like you're somewhere wild, way more than any South Downs or the Surrey Hills or something like that. You've got scrap yards, you've got skip hires and cranes, as well as loads of seabirds. Had a seal just there on the sand when I walked there last.
Yeah, I saw one having a little sunbathe.
Exactly. And I definitely feel that those sort of spaces that sort of can connect you with London's history while making you feel like you're in a wild area. So I think that it's easy to not appreciate these sort of places. And clearly all these businesses are there because they probably got it for very cheap. It's just like, no one wants to be here. Here is some land, you can store your cranes here, or you can sort rubbish. But these are spaces that I feel have been very good for wildlife. When you see green parks or something, you think these places are good for wildlife, but they're really not. It's not particularly useful for most things there, but somewhere where it might look a lot more overgrown or things. But when you see so many different sort of lovely stone chats and birds that I would just never see around Lewisham, it's a nice spot.
And one of the rivers that you mentioned was the Ravensbourne, which is one I have yet to walk. So I've done around Deptford Creek, round there, but I haven't walked to the source. So tell me about that.
Well, so first I did from Forest Hill, Sydenham, up to the Thames, which is up through Ladywell, Catford, St John's, Deptford Creek to the Thames. Did that a few times, and then I was like, well, where does it start? Because actually I was sort of fairly ignorant on this, basically, and I just thought that these streams, more of them just sort of came from the Surrey Hills. But it turns out that looking at it, and the Ravensbourne or the Darrant or the Cray or all of these rivers that go from sort of southeast into the Thames, nearly all will come up from springs.
Mm-hmm.
And I found someone's blog who went down there a little while ago, and it's in the old land of a country manor, and they'd sculpted a few lakes and had a sort of little fountain that they'd made around the source. And I was like thinking, that looks nice. let's try that. Yeah, it was a good walk. Bromley Common, because when I looked it on the map, Bromley Commons is this enormous green space, and I was hoping we could go down through the middle, but I didn't really find the best way to go through Bromley Common. Later, someone on Instagram was like, it's not on the map. But I said, this lady did give me a route.
There is something therapeutic about walking for the sake of walking, but then there's also walking along a river and following the course of the river. There's something quite hypnotic about that. What do you think?
The sound of bubbling water and stuff is a nice sound. I think pretty much universally everyone can appreciate that one. Obviously water's a good place for wildlife generally. Kingfishers on the River Pool and the Ravensbourne as well. Where you were in Deptford Creek, Brookmill Park is wonderful for birds, not far from there. And all these places that used to have all these mills, and Deptford with its history of shipbuilding, that's what the Ravensbourne was, at that point. It's, people building ships up the top and walking along there and trying to think about what it might have been like or what it might have felt like. And I'm sure it's something that, you've done in every London walking tour you've ever done, to try to walk the streets and try to feel what it might have felt, what it sounded like, what it might have smelt like, what people would have felt. It is certainly a nice one. And in that same place, the Cray River was how I ended up in the Crayford Marshes, because I was like, okay, I'm going to get the train to St Mary Cray and I'm going to walk the river to the Thames. Didn't really know what it was going to do particularly, but I had an enormous Tudor manor hall house right with a sculptured manicured garden. It's next to, I don't know which road it is. It's an enormous motorway. It's like big old A roads, loads of industrial stuff, scrap yards or something, and an enormous Tudor manor with the most beautiful garden with the River Cray running through it. It's very curious.
My goodness, it's amazing, isn't it? I remember going up to Broxbourne, and that was really interesting, seeing how the architecture changed over time, how they'd, banked the reservoirs and making a different connection to, maybe it's not obvious history, but when you take the time, you're walking only a certain pace, and I'm sure I've got shorter legs than you. But you are forced to take in stuff that normally you'd be too busy with your phone or whizzing to somewhere, catching a bus or whatever. Taking that time to just appreciate the here and now is something quite powerful.
For certain. And the River Lee and that part of northeast London is a great place for rural urban spaces. Woodbury Wetlands, the Walthamstow Wetlands that the London Wildlife Trust, that was, I think, when was that? I think about 5 years ago, maybe they sort of opened that as an official place. Hackney Marshes, the Middlesex filter beds are all fantastic. I used to live around that area, but not for 7 or 8 years now, but definitely walked around it a lot back in the day. And I think, this is a great example of sort of, I think you see London encroaching on the land, but sometimes the land encroaches on London as well. Like with the filter beds aren't filtering the water anymore, but it's become a more rural space. I think that also part of the reason is just simply when you're not getting the tube, and this is probably, I imagine that a lot of the listeners here are people from London, or at the very least, people who are interested in London. When you're always getting the tube or the train, it can give you a false sense of how far you've gone. And I think, I knew it in the abstract, but I didn't realise that, you could really just wake up in the morning in Forest Hill and walk to Alexandra Palace by the early evening. I buy these Ordnance Survey maps, because you can buy them off eBay for £2.90, and it's like Ordnance Survey map of Forest Hill, 1890, 1920, and to see how the area has built up. When Forest Hill is a pretty established little village town, Catford is more or less completely empty. There's a manor down there and a couple of farms. And then to have it as a sort of bustling metropolis centre of southeast London, which is what it is really. Interesting, I need to get to the interim bit, because I've kind of got one where it's not there and I've got one where it is there, but I haven't quite fully understood the journey.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? And that's when you walk around these areas, and you can see, like with Catford, they still have very nice Victorian buildings. It's just that they're sort of not necessarily been looked after as much as they would have been then. But if I'd had a house back looking like that back in Victorian times, I would have been so proud. And over time, our expectations of housing requirements and that has changed, and you can see that on the front of the streets, really, in the houses.
Close to me, we have the wonderful Sydenham Hill Woods, which is the largest remnant of South London's Great North Wood. It's actually the first place that the London Wildlife Trust actually took on in the 80s. I think it was run by the council, and the London Wildlife Trust was a formative charity, and it was donated to them, I think, in 83. It's one of those ones where during the last 12 months, a lot of people have taken refuge in there as to get some fresh air, go for some walks, etc. It means it's a lot busier for me, but it is nice to see so many people discovering their ancient woodlands. But I think that one thing that I wanted to talk about on here is I think people often think of it as a bit of a linear line, where London is built by the Romans and sort of expanded outwards, which has happened, but it's a lot more complicated than that, of expanding, contracting, areas that were once built up are not anymore, areas that were once wooded are not anymore, but areas that weren't wooded in 1840 might now be a big wood. And I think it's changing. There's a painting by Camille Pissarro in Sydenham Hill Woods from the bridge, looking from there towards Forest Hill Station. And there's not a tree in sight. And when you stand on that bridge now, you're in the middle of a forest. And to see and it's been reclaimed from all sorts of different places, quite a lot of gardens, the train line that ran from when the Crystal Palace opened, which is, of course, like the transformative event of Victorian times for this area of London, or southeast London, from a place that nobody really wanted to go, and suddenly had the biggest tourist attraction in London, and everybody of their day wanted to come down. So people were building houses and all that. So the train line went, but then when the Crystal Palace went, nobody really wanted to go anymore, and the train line was just taken up, and I guess, I don't know, melted down or laid to a different train line somewhere else. And the woods grew up around it. And yeah, it's definitely a lovely place to go. Although it does add a small bugbear of mine. It's the Google Map bugbear.
Tell us more.
Basically, on Google Map, a park is green. Like, that's what green means, park.
Right.
Woodland or somewhere like that, that's not green. That's just generally empty. And if you look at it, it doesn't feel immediately obvious that that's a green space.
So what I don't understand. What they just leave it space, like it is like unclaimed.
Exactly. Sydenham Hill Woods. You have all green for the golf course. That's all green, the golf course. And then next to it, it's just blank. There's a little tick that says Dulwich Wood or Hillcrest Wood, but essentially it's just empty.
That's such a missed opportunity, isn't it? Because people don't know necessarily that they can go there.
Of course not. And in many ways, these sort of places offer so much more than the parks. And I hope that in the next 10, 20, 30 years, London tries to get a more sustainable approach to its parks. So how it can be integrated better into those sort of wild spaces, so it can be a good place for humans to, whatever, play football, picnic and walk, or whatever it is that you like to do in a park. But it can also not be essentially a near desert in terms of wildlife.
That's amazing, because, it's not too far away from the Horniman Museum and Gardens at all, looking at the map. And I've been there plenty of times, and I didn't know that Sydenham Hill Wood existed.
And I'm sure I lived here for at least a year or more before I, noticed it was there. I can't remember exactly what happened now, but the history of that place is very interesting. And I'm actually, tomorrow morning, I'm meeting my producer Sarah at 6:45 in the woods to record our podcast. And I think we'll get the best recordings of the birds and the wildlife, and we can have a nice walk around there. Yeah, the Great North Wood, the Norwood, which gives name to that part of London. I went through the whole of southeast London. And what I thought, CJ Schuler did a great YouTube video, and I think he's just released a book as well about the history of the Great North Wood. And what I would have thought, and what you would mainly think, is that, it was a woodland. As London expanded, more people, they chopped it down and turned it into farmland or whatever. And that is true to an extent. But actually, all through time, this wood was vital to the people that lived there. This was what they burnt for fuel, to keep them warm, to cook their food. No woods meant starvation. And it's really only with the Industrial Revolution, when they didn't need the wood anymore, was actually when they cut it down. It wasn't so much like the population increase. It was just like, we don't need that wood anymore. We use coal now. And I thought that was very curious. But we're lucky to still have some of it. I mean, the big part of it was because it was owned by Dulwich College that was there, and that was some extremely rich college that didn't have any need to sell it off. And with the train line closing, getting that extra corridor. But I think also another point that's important is to remember that these spaces are not there by coincidence. Nearly all of our open spaces have had to be fought for throughout time. London spaces are worth money, and people will want to build on them from early time until now. I'm sure there's loads going on right now, more than I have any idea about. People are having to campaign so that people don't build on these places. In 83, when it was handed over to the Wildlife Trust, a whole section of the top end of the woods, essentially it used to be 6 big manors, and that's why you get these quite fancy trees in the woods that aren't native. There's a mulberry, there's a cedar, ones that people would have planted in their gardens. Only rubble remains of those houses, and they wanted to build a load of flats, and the people campaigned to stop it. I mean, Honour Oak Hill, just up the road from me, was famously had a huge riot when the entire area was fenced off when it was sold in 1890, and it was going to be a golf course. Don't get me started on golf courses.
Why?
Approximately 2% of all land in England is devoted to golf courses.
2%? More
than housing. 1% of the UK is housing and 2% is golf courses.
I can't get my head around that. 2% doesn't sound very much, but when you compare that to housing, which actually we need, that is outrageous.
It is mad. And I think basically cash-strapped councils after the war had a lot of space and not a lot of money. And some of this area, what was allowed to be built on, was built on, but lots of spaces was, may say, in the green belt, or for some other reason or another, couldn't get permission for building like that. So they're like, okay, well, we'll get what we can get from it, and we'll sell it as a golf course. I mean, it could be worse. I'd rather have golf courses than, car parks.
Yeah, I mean, imagine what South Bank would have been like if they had actually run with the 1960s plan of turning the South Bank into a gigantic car park. I mean, it'd be a very different London now.
I don't want to say that it's that it's the very worst, but I think we can do better.
Yep, I agree. Anthony, thank you so much. That's been really, really interesting, and I hope it's maybe inspired our listeners to get up and start exploring a little bit more of their local area in a bit more detail. That's all for now. See you next week.